current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, thank you, Sir David, for that intro. This is the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast. We're up to episode 292. I'm Trevor, aka the Iron Fist. With me, as always, Paul the 12th Man.
Greetings, Earthlings.
Shae, who has yet to have a nickname. Welcome again, Shae.
Hi, everyone.
And Joe, the tech guy.
Evening all.
Right. There's a podcast, as usual, we talk about news and politics and sex and religion and gender. And we talk about gender, and gender a lot is probably what's going to be happening over, well, it happened last week, and it's going to be happening this week.
Can we talk about sex tonight?
Yes, okay. Yeah, we'll do that too. So yes, because really the topic at the moment is about the feminism movement and the rallies and what's going on in our federal parliament, and that seems to be the focus. So we'll obviously concentrate on that to start with and see how we're going. If you're in the chat room, say hello. Hello to Daniel and Rachel. Hello, Rachel, friend of mine. So good on you, Rachel. Yes, so let's start off with our old friend Christian Porter. And so Christian decided he needed a few weeks off for stress leave. Call me crazy, but if you're wanting to avoid stress and you head to one of the most high-priced lawyers in Australia and start organising a defamation case, I don't think that would lower your stress levels. Do you? Like, it wouldn't be. I don't know. It was a mental health break. Maybe this helps his mental health to let loose and start an action.
Did he actually go there initially to organise a defamation suit, or just to get advice, general advice?
Well, who knows? But that's what he's ended up doing.
That's what he's ended up doing. Yes, but I think
Yeah.
the way you couched it sounded like that was his,
Well,
initial aim, and we don't know that.
he definitely gave the impression that he had to take time off from what was a grueling and exhausting and harrowing experience of being hauled in front of the cameras, and he couldn't work because he needed to get his head together.
That's understandable in the
That
circumstances.
is, but as part of that, the idea is go and sit at home, detox for a while, rest, recuperate, clear your head. But I don't know. I just wouldn't have thought that starting a pretty high-risk defamation case is necessarily good mental therapy. I don't know that his doctor would have prescribed that as a thing to do when you're trying to get mental rest.
Never been in that situation.
Yeah,
so
you wouldn't think it'd
dunno.
be sort of stressful. Anyway, so on stress leave, the day after the Liberal Party was obliterated in Western Australia, and on the same day as the nationwide women's rally, he announces his defamation case against the ABC. So this is interesting, I think, because there were calls for an inquiry into his guilt or otherwise. And he was like, well, we can't do that because what am I going to say except was not me? No point in having an inquiry. But now he's come out with a defamation case, and one of the defences for the ABC will be that it is substantially true, the allegation, which will then lead to an inquiry as to his guilt. Like there'll be witnesses called and assessments made as to whether he's guilty or not. So I think this is a little risky but quite clever, because if it was just an inquiry conducted the way it has been proposed, the almost certain outcome would be inconclusive. We can't tell if he's guilty or not. This way, the way the defamation laws work, they're actually very plaintiff-friendly. So he's got a system that is favourable to him and difficult for the ABC. And remember, now we've just got the ABC that's going to be running the case to prove his guilt, rather than the whole mechanism of an independent inquiry where you've got the government supplying all sorts of people and able to... I don't know, if I was facing up to an opposition and I was in Christian Porter's shoes, I would rather be facing an ABC-funded defamation trial than a full-blown inquiry with all sorts of people involved. And the likelihood is that he will be found to have a successful defamation case, and he can say, well, I won my defamation case and it's all over and I will continue, rather than an inconclusive case against a better prepared defence. That's the way I see it. Anybody disagree with that assessment? There seems to be the way it's panning out. Yeah. So, of course, the risk is that they come back and say, well, actually, there was substantial truth to the ABC allegation, and then his career is in ruins.
Yeah.
But that's the way he's decided to run it.
And isn't the defamation not necessarily about the alleged rape case, but about his behaviour in general?
I don't know exactly what it'll come down to.
Is it not to do with the quality of the reporting in the ABC? Because I recall reading one article in the ABC online news site, and I was a little bit surprised by the wording used. They didn't just say he was accused of raping this young woman, you know, when they were both teenagers. They actually used the word brutal. They said he was, you know...
a brutal anal rape is sort of what's been alleged.
Oh, right. So an anal rape, yes. Oh, that's right, yeah. But I mean, well, I don't know. I just thought that the ABC, in reporting that, was a little bit intemperate with their language.
Well, if it's true, this is the thing.
Brutal, we don't know. To be raped, is a criminal act, obviously. But to then embellish it with, you know, extra adjectives to make it sound even, you know, more horrible, I think is a little bit risky, isn't it, in reporting? I think you know where I'm coming from. I mean, to report that he was accused of rape, I think, is enough, isn't it? Without trying to embellish it with extra adjectives, you know, to, I don't know, inflame the reader's emotions. So I don't know whether that's part of the reason for his libel suit against him.
No, that's not the
Defamation
reason.
suit.
Just because of that embellishment, if that's what you want to call it, would not be the reason. It's all about trying to get a clear name for him where he can say, I ran a defamation case, I won. They were shown to have not been able to prove the truth of the matter, therefore I continue on as normal. That's his tactic, I think. So we'll see.
I don't know.
Very interesting case coming up. That'll cost a lot of money for some people. The ABC didn't actually name him originally, but his argument is that there was enough information about that people could surmise that it was him. So that's another part of the whole thing. So we'll see how that all pans out.
But he was eventually named. After he outed himself, he was obviously named.
Yes, and the ABC will say, well, you outed yourself. And they will say, but there was already enough information given that identified me. So that'll all come out in the wash. Yeah. So
could it have anything to do with that the Four Corners program that they did on him, and who was the other?
That's the initial Four Corners program, I think, is what they're talking about.
Is that what he's suing for?
I think so.
Oh, so not about online articles?
No, I think it's the Four Corners.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So it is the Four Corners article. Okay.
Yeah. So interesting tactic, interesting timing. We'll see. Probably, you know, he's obviously got very good advice about this. So the chances are he'll get a win because of defamation.
From the head of who are they now?
MinterEllison?
What is it? MinterEllison, who's resigned over it.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Well, we'll get onto that. So, we'll just mention it. So, let me just find where I had that down.
It was the acting sort of manager of the practice.
Yes, it was the boss of MinterEllison. She put out an email to all staff because he initially got advice through the partner at MinterEllison, and she put out an email saying, the nature of this matter is clearly causing hurt to some of you, and it has triggered hurt for me. And the partners basically said, "What are you talking about? We're a law firm. This is the sort of stuff we do."
Exactly.
And he went through all the normal protocols. So she was not a lawyer. She came in as some sort of accountant, a consulting background. And that is one of the things about the law, is you can represent people without... like murderers, Ivan Milat needed a defence counsel. Like, nobody looks down on the people who act in these matters because everyone's entitled to representation. So
the whole Cardinal Pell thing, people were going, who could act for him? And it's like, well, if he doesn't get a decent defence, then he's been unjustly prosecuted.
Yeah,
Indeed.
so certainly in legal circles, it's like there's no disgrace in acting for all sorts of shady characters because everybody's entitled to something, and she got that very wrong.
I thought it was an extraordinary act on her part. And if you were working in a law firm, Trevor, and you received that kind of message from the manager, wouldn't you be a little bit surprised?
No, and clearly they were. They were outraged. The whole firm, it seems, all the partners. It didn't take long for them to say, "On your bike." It did not take long at all. So, yeah. So anyway...
according to the Fin Review and Crikey, though, she'd sort of been employed as this progressive person that was bringing this firm into, considering minority groups that had the first gay and lesbian float, the Mardi Gras. So
Kind of
I
diversity
just wanted
officer.
to add that.
Yeah, that kind of was...
I am in agreement that was ill-considered to send that email, and she certainly should have sought legal advice before she wrote it.
You're right, but that was one of her roles, was to kind of provide a softer side to the firm.
Yes, so she may have thought she was doing her role. Yes.
To make it less blokey.
But apparently she drafted an even stronger email, and she was talked out of it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
I read that somewhere. So.
Should have just deleted them all.
So yeah.
I wonder she didn't arrange... what is it? Inherent bias training for the staff of the law firm.
Yeah.
What do they call it again?
Consent.
No, it's about...
Implicit bias.
That's it. Implicit bias training.
Right. I don't know. Anyway, just on this whole sexual assault allegations against federal politicians and staffers, what is the view of the community out there? And there was a poll done asking people, is this just a Canberra insider story? Only 16% of people thought that. What is happening in Canberra is relevant to all women. 68% of Australians agreed. It's time women were believed when they say they have been assaulted. 67 agree. Because the charge of rape is so serious, the burden of proof needs to be high. 62% agree. So on those ones about it's relevant to all women and women need to be believed, on those sorts of questions, I find the interesting thing is, obviously, or unsurprisingly, females more than males agreed with that statement. But the interesting one is in age groups, the 18 to 34 were less likely to agree with those statements. People in their middle age and older were more likely to agree. So young people were less likely to agree with those statements. I find that interesting. And
what about the wording of one of them? It's time women were believed. So that implies that women weren't believed?
It does.
Which, to me, looks like push polling.
It's. I don't know if that's push polling in the definitive sense, but it's certainly...
Well, if you're asking people, do you agree it's time women were believed? Isn't it implied that women weren't believed?
It does
prior
imply that.
To this?
Yes, and it's different to a question that might have been, should women be believed?
To me, that would be better. Yeah, I think it's wise not to try to, what would you say, put ideas into the heads of the people you're polling. The questions need to be carefully worded, I think.
Take all polls with a grain of salt, but it is just interesting that the younger generation, given the same questions, responded less enthusiastically in support of women. Shae, as a representative of that 18 to 34-year-old group, defend your cohort here. Why? Well, does that surprise you? Would you have
Yes,
thought
I
younger
thought they
people?
would have been, like, certainly I was at the march on Monday and we seemed to be highly represented, our age group,
Yeah.
at that march.
Might be just an error in this poll.
Can I ask you, Shae, why did you attend?
Because I think that they need to clean up what happened to Brittany Higgins.
Do you think it was just about Brittany Higgins?
No, I think it was about the way that we are overrepresented as sexual assault survivors. And had enough. We've really had enough. We want justice done.
But
Some justice to be seen, to be done somewhere.
So as support for people who are agitating for things to be done,
Yes.
would that be a good way of framing it?
Yes.
As support for the concept?
do you have any ideas of what could be done?
There was a petition
Yes.
associated with these rallies,
And
and
do you know the wording of the petition?
I did look it up. Some of it was quite vague. Some of it was more specific. There's about sort of 8 different things on there, from things like staff at Parliament House should be subject to normal employment rules, for example, rather than these little fiefdoms that every member of Parliament can just fire at will people within their own group. And so were things as specific as that, but there were more things about more generalised things. So, yeah, a wide-ranging bunch of things. So
The woman who spoke or made a speech on Monday at the end said that the respect report that was done in 2018, a number of the recommendations from there, I meant to grab it before I got here tonight, but I would definitely, I can bring it for you next week and show you which ones I think would make a difference to these.
the petition said something like that all 58 recommendations of the respect
Yes. Be implemented.
That was one of the
Yeah, I'd like to
recommendations.
see what
So,
they,
yeah.
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things. So you were in the Brisbane one, and it was just a rally rather than a march, just a gathering somewhere in a park.
We met at King George Square and then we marched to Parliament House.
Okay.
And the Premier and a few of the state members were there to greet us, and
Yep.
I think it was well received. The people we passed by clapped, so
Any idea of numbers?
it looked like a lot.
Like
So
1,000,
if it was,
2,000?
if there was, I was trying to work it out this morning when I was listening to the news. If we had 100,000 in total, I'd say we probably came close to 5,000 to 7,000 in Brisbane. It was big.
Right, that's a lot. In the chat room, John says, I was talking to the 18-year-old girlfriend of my son yesterday, and she commented that some women lie about these issues. She didn't really know about the new issue as she doesn't pay attention to politics. So anyway, just a distrust of her
and
fellow females as potential liars.
on your reading list, Trevor, there was mention of a Japanese female politician who said something similar.
Yes. Where was that one? That was the female MP awarded Japan's most sexist comment. So, yes. She'd finished second in 2019 after saying that members of the LGBT community were unproductive because they can't have children. But she won it this year by saying women can lie as much as they like about sexual violence. So that's a female sort of conservative politician in Japan, which you don't really think of Japan as having that sort of character in their politics. But
Really?
I hadn't, but clearly they do, yeah. And it's a very patriarchal society.
It
Japan,
is,
yes.
more so than here.
Yes. So interesting that a female politician has taken on that patriarchal view.
Well, you can call it a patriarchal view, or you can just say that maybe that's been her experience.
Yes.
You know, I think it's a little bit unfair to label it a patriarchal view because she is a woman and she's speaking as a woman, and maybe her life experience tells her that some women, at least, lie about various things, including sexual misdemeanors.
Women can have a patriarchal view, though. You can have a patriarchal viewpoint. So I agree with you. Maybe patriarchal, maybe not the best expression, but it doesn't, just because you are a woman doesn't mean you can't adopt a viewpoint that's anti-woman, for example.
Well, I don't think she was necessarily.
No, but I'm just saying, just because
anti-woman.
you are somebody doesn't mean you can't take a view that traditionally is thought of as being held by somebody of another sex or another gender.
Yes, but it's also not fair to say that women cannot criticise other women,
I didn't say that. I thought it's interesting that you sort of well...
But to say that she has a patriarchal view, I think is...
Yeah, I'll withdraw the patriarchal, but I just think it's interesting that she's a traitor to the sisterhood. Can I say that?
Yes, you can.
Well, I think actually relevant to this was the French case, and it's a bit of a tangent, but the murder of the French school teacher.
Yes.
Who was accused of being a racist in class, and now the girl who accused him of kicking them out of class for being Muslims,
which incited
him being murdered on the steps of the school or outside the school. The police knew he'd been interviewed by the police, and he had said she'd been suspended. Turns out she wasn't even in the class, and she's now admitted that. So it does happen that people get accused of things for attention, for whatever reason.
People lie.
People do lie.
Yeah.
And
the article you sent us was, I think, in French, so I Googled it.
Yes.
And apparently it was actually quite clear knowledge that the father knew she'd been suspended.
Yes.
So she knew, like, he knew, the
he
dad
knew she was
the
lying.
daughter wasn't there.
Right.
So
Yeah,
while she was lying or not, it doesn't necessarily mean he didn't just kill him because he could.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know the murderer knew that, but certainly, the father knew that.
Right.
But I think it's an assumption, but it's foreseeable that the murderer would have killed him anyway, just for the crime
Of showing the pictures.
of showing the
absolutely.
pictures. Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, people do lie.
People lie.
Yes.
And
I think...
I don't.
Yes.
Well, maybe some.
And this survey is sort of indicating that people in the younger age groups are perhaps more willing to recognise that based on the answer to that question, it seems. Yeah, or more aware of that. I'm more aware of that, or
I
more
don't
what?
know, because the charge of rape is so serious, the burden of proof needs to be high. Is that what you're referring to as determining?
It's time women were believed when they say they've been assaulted.
Okay.
59% of 18 to 34-year-olds agree. 71% of 55 plus. So it's a 12% difference. So just anyway.
Could be that they're,
they might read the question
noticing
differently.
the way
Indeed.
that Paul reads it.
Indeed.
Thinking, I believed it.
Indeed. Yeah. All right. Hard to explain that one. All right. Western Australian election, just quickly, landslide over there that as predicted. And in the lower house, Labor has won probably 50 seats. Liberals probably 3. Nationals probably 5. In the upper house, Labor will win probably 23 of the 36 seats. So that's not nearly as big a margin as in the lower house. And the reason is that there's a ridiculous arrangement in terms of voting in Western Australia.
Is it different?
Yes, the way that... Well, gerrymander is probably not the right word, but here's how it works. The Legislative Council, their upper house, is elected from 6 regions. Each region elects 6 members. 3 of those regions cover metropolitan Perth, which includes 75% of all voters. The other 3 regions cover the remainder of the state. So you've got 3 regions holding 75% of the population and 3 regions holding 25% of the population. And each region elects the same number of upper house politicians.
Seems unbalanced, doesn't it?
Extremely unbalanced.
Sounds like the Electoral College.
So it's this is the
Sounds
problem with
like-
these upper houses in all countries. It seems like Australia, with our federal system, we
Yeah.
have a fixed number of senators per
That's
state,
right.
even though some states.
Tasmania gets
Yep.
the same number of
Yep.
Senate seats.
Senators
as
as Victoria.
yeah, and New South Wales.
It's not a problem in the UK.
Yeah.
You
No,
just
they
have
have-
26 bishops instead.
Yes, indeed. But then in the US, they've got 2 senators per state. So somewhere like Wyoming, which has got 3 men and a dog, gets 2 senators. Meanwhile, California also gets 2 senators. So there's a lot of our democracies aren't perfect, are they?
But perhaps as with Australia, and the reason why Tasmania and Western Australia and South Australia were given equal representation in the Senate was to create a more, what would you say, uniform sense of we're all in this together, to use a common
No, it was a
phrase.
fear that they would be ganged up on by the more populous states.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah.
And the same in the United States, because some of those Midwestern states have
yeah,
a lot fewer people than
yeah.
some of the bigger coastal states.
Mm.
So maybe it was a similar reason.
Mm. So anyway, that's interesting. And so big wins in Queensland recently, Western Australia now, both Labor. New South Wales, apparently the polls are really good for Berejiklian. So Liberal, obviously. So the Labor vote in New South Wales has crashed to 23.9%. So it just goes to show that these state governments have really been well rewarded in terms of the COVID response is basically what's happening, you'd have to say. Even though, Paul, you think people are stupid for thinking that way, that you'd have to say that's probably why these results are like this, is because people are in favour of the COVID response by these state governments.
Yeah, rightly or wrongly, they appear to largely approve.
But don't get excited if you think that's going to transfer federally. So in 2001 in Queensland, Peter Beattie led Queensland Labor to 66 of the 89 lower house seats. So 66 and the coalition got 15. But 9 months later, Howard won comfortably the Queensland federal seats. So it doesn't necessarily follow that people will say in Western Australia.
And federal Labor share of the primary vote has been declining year by year, hasn't it?
Federal Labor, well, they've lost in recent times.
They haven't just
so-
lost. Their share of the primary vote apparently has been declining over the years. Steadily declining.
Compared to the
I don't mean, what do you call it, after they distribute preferences. I mean the primary vote.
right.
But yeah, I would suggest that people are voting green.
Mm.
But the Greens have never risen much above 10%, have they ever?
I don't know the history of the primary vote in federally with Labor. Don't know.
It was just something I saw recently and thought, oh, that's interesting.
Oh, in the chat room, James has joined us. Good on you, James. Everyone's having a good chat in there. We'll keep an eye on it. Just on these sort of approval, how do you rate your state government's response to COVID-19 outbreak? In terms of good, New South Wales 75%, Victoria 62%. That's a big bounce up. It had dropped to 49, but now it's bounced back up to 62. Queensland 75, South Australia 85, Western Australia 91%. These are big, strong numbers. And just on the vaccine, they asked, once the vaccine becomes available to you, how long would you wait before taking it? And the I'll never get vaccinated number is now 12%. So that's up a couple of percent. And with that figure, I'll never get vaccinated, 9% male, 15% female. As a representative of the female community. Shae.
I'm forming a theory about it,
Yeah.
which is that some of my Facebook friends who have their reservations about vaccinating are putting them up on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So where if I wanted to look for information, I would Google it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my most predominantly female friends are typing into Facebook, what do you think? What have you heard? And then they chat.
Right.
And then the comments are largely inaccurate
Right.
information. And then a Facebook fight
So you're-
ensues.
so you're blaming Facebook for some of this?
So I'm just saying that people using the way people use the appropriate avenues, like maybe younger people looking for something to put on Facebook and Instagram rather than actually like fact checking.
Okay, but I thought young people don't use Facebook. I thought
I thought
people
the
in their
stats were
20s.
like 17
Some
million
do.
or something.
Yeah,
So
yeah, but like I just thought
some
that
do,
young
Trevor.
people in their 20s have stopped using Facebook because their parents are on there and it's embarrassing. Isn't that the case? Haven't we done this before?
Yeah.
I
That's
don't know
what
what
my
the
daughter
stats
says.
say.
Yeah, my daughters.
I think that's a
don't- my daughters are-
generalisation.
No. This is a thing for sure. Somebody look up a stat or Google it.
I've
But
met lots of people in their 20s that use Facebook.
yeah, but your lived experience is not a statistic. You know, it's if you. I'm sure we can drag our statistic for next week if
Is
somebody
it-
in the chat room doesn't
is
bring
what-
one out.
What you heard from your daughter, a statistic?
But no, I've seen it backed up by numbers in terms of young people not sort of abandoning Facebook and going to Instagram.
So as a
Yeah.
representative of all the female population, you don't like my theory? Is that what you're saying?
I just
I
don't
need to
know.
workshop it.
I don't know about that
There
one.
was a concern that just as the government was rolling out the vaccine, the news services, including a lot of government health services, were blocked by Facebook. And the anti-vaxxers weren't blocked.
Right.
So they got
okay.
3 or 4 days to spread bullshit without it being counted.
Yes. So and that may be another thing is that people don't really know where to get their accurate information. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not from your girlfriends.
I have a theory on these,
Okay.
these polls.
Oh, great.
Oh, okay. On the I'll never get vaccinated poll.
No.
Oh.
The popularity of the governments, these governments experiencing, surges in their popularity at elections like we had in Queensland, like WA. Maybe people are just so relieved because they've been told by governments all over the country, you're all going to die unless you do what we tell you. Okay. And most people didn't die. So they're like, phew, gee, we came out of that okay. Maybe what the government did was the right thing. I'm going to vote for them. Rightly or wrongly, whether their information is good or faulty, people are relieved that they didn't die after all that,
Your
all the
your
bad
theory is that
news.
people have been swallowed a propaganda line
That's
to
one
be
way of putting
scared,
it.
and they're relieved that they've
Well,
weathered
they
it.
were certainly filled with fear, with all the, hyping of the danger.
An unjustified fear.
I think so.
Here we go. 2020 stats for Facebook. 19.3% are in the age 25 to 34.
Yeah, but how's it progressed over time? Have you got something that shows progression over time in terms of participation?
I'm just looking for that.
Right. Okay. You keep looking for that, Joe. Yes. So when it comes to vaccinations, the people most likely to say no are female and young. So if you're old and conservative, you're probably white conservative old men are more likely to get vaccinated. Gosh.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Of all US social media users surveyed, 32% of those aged 12 to 34 identified Facebook as the most social media platform they use the most. However, this is a drastic drop from only 5 years ago when the top usage was 58.
So 58 down to what?
32.
Yeah, definitely abandoning it. So there we go. Right. Just in terms of this is dominated by gender, this particular episode. There's a thing called the Australian Election Study, a nationally representative survey of voter behaviour that's run after all federal elections since 1987. And in 2019, it showed that although the Liberal National Coalition won the federal election, the Liberal Party attracted the lowest proportion of women's votes since 1987. So, while 45% of men gave their first preference to the Liberal Party, just 35% of women did. So, there's a big gender gap there in terms of first preference. And that's a switch around from what it was 30 years ago. So back in the 90s, women were more likely to vote Liberal, men were more likely to vote Labor. So this is not unique to Australia. It's happening in other democracies around Europe and North America. So that's interesting. Women less likely to vote LNP than men, significantly. And that's a movement in the last 20, 30 years. And just in terms of participation, actually, I've just got this one here. In terms of representation by women in the major parties, so less than 20% of coalition House of Reps MPs are female, compared to 42% of Labor MPs. So there's a lot more Labor female MPs than coalition female MPs. Coalition, only 20%. Labor, 42%. In the Senate, females, 42% for the coalition, 60% for Labor. So there we go. And just another fun fact, stock exchange data for the top 300 listed companies, looking at the directors, 31% are women. So when it comes to participation, the Labor Party, 42% in the lower house, 60% in the upper house, they're getting close to 50%, fairly representative. Be interesting to see if that translates into votes. And given the sort of, I don't know how long this is going to last. Like at the moment, the Morrison government's on the nose about these sorts of issues, but I think people have short memories. 6 months' time, I think they'll have moved on to other stuff. And
people usually vote on economic matters.
Indeed. That's still the main game.
Rather than these sort of ideological...
Yeah, I think that's... So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Jobs and growth.
Jobs and growth. Just a quick Noosa Temple of Satan update. Joe, you went to some satanic beers. Was that good fun?
It was.
Right.
It was unfortunately sparsely attended.
Yes. But anyway, you went there. That was good. For those who are following, we've started with a prayers in Parliament action. So basically the argument is this, that under Queensland Anti-Discrimination Act, which on the face of it applies to the running of Parliament because the Speaker is in charge of a state government program, being the running of the Parliament, you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of religion. And if you do the Lord's Prayer at the beginning of the sitting day, that's going to be uncomfortable for people who aren't Christian.
It's not the same because reasons.
Because reasons, yeah. So
there was a petition.
There was a petition
some time ago. When was it? Last year or the year before?
There's been various petitions, but the petitions just simply say, please stop because we don't like it. And we ask that you just not cease doing this practice. And of course,
but they also give reasons, don't they? And I think they did say that it was unrepresentative of a multi-faith community.
Yes, but if you actually go to the Human Rights Commission with a complaint, then you can get an order saying stop this practice. So Noosa Temple of Satan has written to the Speaker of the House saying, as we read it, you're not allowed to do this. And I think this is one where the temple will actually get other religious groups to join, like maybe the Buddhists or maybe
one
other...
of the commenters on Facebook was going, but none of the other religions are complaining.
Yeah.
So hopefully they do.
Yeah. I think some of the more obscure, smaller ones might.
I would assume so.
Yeah. So the temple's going to reach out to those groups and say, let's do this as a representative action and try and get changed. And the Christian lobby will say, well, it's been a tradition that we do this. It's part of our Judeo-Christian heritage. We're doing it a long time.
Blackbirding.
Yes. And the point is that under the Anti-Discrimination Act, there's nothing there to say that maintaining a tradition is a defence or a reason to excuse you from discriminatory behaviour. So
I'm a little bit surprised that the Muslim community hasn't complained about that because, I mean, you know, they're only a few % of the population, but they're still part of the community. And to have a strictly
Yeah.
Christian religious observance in the parliament doesn't seem very representative of the entire community.
Well, let's face it. You're going to get a lot of shit from people for doing it. And, mate...
For complaining.
Yes. So I would have thought the Muslim community would just probably go, oh, God, is it worth it? You think?
Yeah,
Is
I
that a
agree.
good theory?
That's just like,
Yeah.
Don't know.
So it's really the
They
Satanists who
complain
just
about
say...
other things
Pick your
that
battle.
they don't like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they'd rather get their mosque spilled,
Yes.
given the shit that they went through
Yeah.
whenever it was trying to build a mosque, and
Right.
all of the Christians were going, not in our backyard.
Yeah. So they I suspect...
Want to keep the population on side.
Yeah, I would think. But if it's offered up, they might agree. Who knows? Be interesting to see.
it will.
It'll be a tricky decision for the Muslims to agree with the Satanists on anything. So we'll see what
It's
happens.
fun to imagine, though.
Yes. So
It's fun.
have a look at the website for New Temple of Satan. There's a donations link. We need money over there for freedom of information applications and other stuff. So feel free to drop a few dollars in the coin tin there. Right. Now, we've got a message from... Now, earlier on this evening, Shae was again bonding with Mrs. Fist over the length of the episodes. My wife was saying to Shae, make sure they finish early. Yeah. So we've had some. We've got a message from Land and Hardbottom here. So I'll just play what Landon's got to say.
Fist, 12th man, Joe the tech guy, new girl Shae, Hardbottom here. New girl, you're not the first person to suggest shortening the length of my podcast, but I remind you, the last person who made that suggestion received a visit from two rather large chaps who were there to perform knee surgery on him. I have a carrot for you. You can sit there and be the voice of all women in Australia and drink free beer. And now, the stick. If you persist in this attempt to shorten my podcast, those two rather large men that I spoke of will bundle you up, place you in a French nuclear submarine, retrofitted to run on diesel. You will be sent to my secret lair beneath a volcanic island. There you will be tied to a chair atop a tank of hungry sharks, each one fitted with a Jewish space laser. There you will be forced to listen to an endless argument between Fist and 12th Man about COVID-19 and how deadly it is and the effectiveness of lockdowns. The choice is yours.
It was all sounding pretty mild until it got to the debate that you had to listen to. The Shark Tank.
Almost like
But where is this going?
an adventurous holiday.
Right, we better last an hour and a half just to keep you away from the Shark Tank and away from the endless debate. Now, back to Meghan and Harry and the interview with Oprah. And one of the things to come out of it was one of the members of the royal family seemingly made a comment which was, I wonder what skin colour this kid will have when it pops out of Meghan. And that was seen as quite a racist statement to make. And Paul, have you got any thoughts on that issue?
I think it was extremely mischievous of them to mention it at all.
Mm.
I mean, because then they refused to name who it was, and you know, to sort of make that sort of allegation and just leave it hanging, I think was extremely mischievous, designed to damage, you know, the monarchy, to damage the firm, as they call it. And I don't know. I think it was very poorly judged on Harry's part, and certainly on Meghan's part too. She hasn't exactly endeared herself to the family by doing so. I mean, if she ever wanted to get along with them, I think she's blown it forever now. But it's an extremely mischievous allegation to make. I mean, you know, obviously, for good reason, racism is considered a very bad thing, you know, by most people around the world, and rightly so. But to smear the entire royal family like that, I thought was very, very poorly judged.
Shae, do you think that if you're going to make a statement like that, you should say who said it, or is it okay to leave it up in the air? Or just say a person unnamed?
I hadn't thought about it like that.
I hadn't either until you mentioned it.
I suppose you put your money where your mouth is. I
But
don't know. Would it possibly be worse? Maybe it was like one of the ones that's already.
The implication was it was either Charles or
No.
William.
Or William, really.
Yeah.
But
Because I
also-
initially thought that has to be Philip, for sure. But then they said it wasn't Philip, which is interesting that they did that. So I think if you're going to make that statement, just say who it is. And
Well, it was tied to the statement that Archie isn't going to be a prince. Now, this has been misrepresented. He isn't a prince because of royal decree from 1917, so nothing to do with skin colour. However, when the Queen dies and Charles becomes king, he would automatically become a prince.
yes.
And Charles has said he wants to reduce the number of princes in the royal family, and therefore would probably cut out most of his grandchildren except those in direct line for the throne.
Right.
The allegation was that he was plotting this because of the colour of the baby's skin and not because he sees the royal family as being bloated.
Really?
Yep.
Oh. Anyway, it's I don't know. If somebody was just pondering, I wonder what skin colour this kid's going to have. Is that necessarily racist?
No, and I was just going to say that. It's not necessarily racist, is it?
Because
Paul, you have mixed race children.
The mother of my children is Japanese. I personally don't subscribe to the idea that we're different races, but yes, if in the common parlance, they are.
So was there curiosity as to what your children would look like?
For who? Nobody ever mentioned it in my family. I mean, if that's what you're implying, no, nobody in my family ever mentioned it.
No, I'm just curious.
But I mean, after a baby's born, it's quite normal to say, oh, the baby's got this trait from its father or this trait from its mother, like it's got long legs or colour hair or whatever. Like, that's quite normal.
Yes.
Well-
To say what traits, physical traits, a baby looks like it's got from its parents. And that's
people
seen,
do talk about
and that's seen as quite a reasonable thing to say.
Absolutely.
Shae, you seem to be ready to object to where I'm leading this.
Well, I went hunting with all the gender stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It was really about that Japanese article. But I found today 1,000 terrible things Australian men have said about women. And there are some men that feature almost every year. And it got me thinking about your remarks about context. So sometimes there's pretext to the context. So this is follow me on this. So John Howard features in this book quite a lot as what's called an Ernie Award almost every year for a whole range of things. One of the examples is that he issued an edict that women were not allowed to wear pants in his office.
Really?
So says this book, and a whole range of other things. So you can imagine I have this pretext about John Howard, and then I get pregnant, and then he just happens to want to know what gender my baby will be. Do you understand? So it's like after years of him making remarks,
When
having
were you
these
working
edicts,
for John Howard?
I didn't. I'm using as an example, right?
Sorry,
So
say that again. I just got distracted because I was looking at... Say that again, sorry.
Okay, so the pretext is that John Howard is sexist.
Yes.
And then I work for John Howard, an example.
Yeah.
And I get pregnant, and then he just happens to innocently ask me what gender my baby will be.
Right.
So with that kind of pretext, then what is the context of this conversation? Like it potentially could be really offensive.
To ask...
So
to
what I'm
ask
saying is
what-
Meghan Markle's interview, the pretext is that she was suffering a lot of different types of pretextual kind of offensive things, and then this was just on top of all of the other things. She was feeling abandoned, not welcome, and then this happened.
Right.
So that's where I'm kind of standing,
Okay,
is that
if
I
there was
can
a-
appreciate that would be potentially a hurtful remark given the pretext.
A statement on its own that might appear to be fairly neutral could have a more sinister or nasty implication if there's a lead up to it by
Boom.
other stuff.
Yes.
Or,
Right.
Better
or
said.
somebody
Right.
who is whose nerves are worn raw by general surrounding is oversensitive to an innocent remark.
Mm.
Could also be.
Possibly.
So she has experienced racism in America,
Mm-hmm.
and an innocent remark was taken out of context. Could either be. So she's seen it as being something that it isn't. So it could be either.
Possibly. So if there is no pretext to the context, and it's just a simple remark of, gee, I wonder if this kid's going to have
Skin.
pale skin or olive skin, particularly because Harry is a redhead. So,
So actually, on that
with
point,
pasty white skin, presumably,
do you not remember the whole?
and looks a lot like his mother's butler. But
What?
The rugby
Careful.
player, wasn't it?
So whoever it is, her assistant or bodyguard or something like
Yeah,
that.
it
Like
was
Harry is definitely
very different from Charlie.
he definitely looks a lot like this. Was it a bodyguard or an assistant or
I can't remember.
whatever? Who was a
Have you heard this sort of stuff about Harry before?
You haven't heard this
No.
before, right?
Seriously?
I haven't either.
Yeah, I don't.
Right. So anyway,
Scuttlebutt.
it's not, given that it's quite normal to look at a baby and to make statements about what features a baby got from physical features that a baby got from either parent, and skin colour is a physical feature. It is quite possible to make that statement in a circumstance that's not meant to be racist or derogatory, but simply, I wonder,
Yeah.
or
And
and it could
why
even
wouldn't
be,
you?
and it could even be, you'd really want the kid to have olive skin because you have less trouble with sunburn and skin cancers and all the rest of it. So
Absolutely.
you kind of be like, gee, if you're a pasty white parent and your partner had beautiful olive skin, you might say, I really hope this kid has my partner's skin because this has just been.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't have to necessarily be derogatory or racist to
No, not at all.
contemplate the skin
No, I
colour
agree.
of an unborn child. And it all depends on context, but they didn't give any context that necessarily made it racist.
They
Everybody
did give you
just...
some pretext though.
The pretext was she was having a hard time in the family and nobody loved her and
That's
she
right.
felt unwanted.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she might have made some of her own conclusions about that. But
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Then people made, additional remarks
Yeah.
to
It
provide
sounds-
evidence.
Sounds a bit like she was inclined to interpret it as racism rather than just as, an off-the-cuff remark.
Well, if you've been subjected to a whole bunch of derogatory comments, that would be human nature,
Like,
is what you're saying, Shae. And
this
Rachel in
book
chat
was-
room
this
agrees
book
with
was-
you.
yeah, this book was hilarious. Like, can I just give one more example? So the Courier Mail reported that the Olympic women's hockey team would not attract a big crowd even if they were nude.
I'd like to challenge that. I think if they were nude, they'd get
I beg to
a big
differ as
crowd.
Stan Grant won an Ernie for his enthusiastic endorsement of an anti-cellulite cream that didn't work.
Really? Anti-cellulite cream? Didn't know it existed.
Anyway,
Right. We're nearly
I
at the end
digress.
of this gender stuff.
Can I just say that in my personal case, I think my children are both extremely attractive, and I love that combination of physical types, you know what I mean? And I envy my daughter who got the more olivey skin
Right.
because she tans so beautifully. And I remember as a teenager being so envious of people who could tan because I have quite pale skin.
Right.
So she did well out of it.
Right.
And
Okay. I was at a dinner party just last weekend, and one of the other couples who will now have to remain nameless was talking about their kids. We've all got adult kids who are, got different partners and whatever, and the guy had this theory of hybrid vigour, which was that if you have mixed race children, this was his theory.
It's common in agriculture. You might be aware.
It is indeed. If you're breeding cows or whatever,
that's right.
Hybrid vigour, and because I think one of his kids had met a Brazilian boy or girl, and another kid had met a Thai boy or girl, forget which, and he was extraordinarily happy and very welcoming, and it was all great. But he was actually positive about the mixed race nature of their union, because he thought that a more let's call it a crossbreeding of
genetically
diverse material was going to lead to really strong offspring, was his theory. And this was all said in a way that was not derogatory and was in fact quite positive about mixed race marriages.
I don't think it's safe to assume that every mixed so-called race child would necessarily have that so-called hybrid vigour. But it is a very common concept in breeding of livestock in agriculture.
So we're really getting very close to this eugenics style discussion. Shae, rescue us from this. How did you allow us to get into that? That's why, dear listener, you won't get this in regular mainstream media. You have to go to podcasts for this discussion. But hey, it's all honest and it's well intentioned. And it's not completely ridiculous.
I have a number of friends, as you would expect, in Japan and elsewhere, who married, across those national boundaries and had children. And gee, I really envy those kids because they've grown up with more than one culture to draw on, and a lot of them, of course, as you'd expect, also are bilingual, including my kids. I think they have a great advantage in life.
I found an article in the Sydney Morning Herald by this writer who was basically looking at this sort of these rallies and really having a go at what she called boomer feminism. And she was basically saying that the feminism we celebrate is shallow and there are unintended consequences of boomer-era feminism. And significantly, boomer feminism brought us the sexual revolution. In some perverse ways, the rape culture young women are currently protesting is a consequence of boomer failure to review the progress of the revolution. Centuries of tradition about the right and wrong way for men and women to interact were swept away. But there was a void which has been left for boys and girls to fill as best they can. And now this part here is from Quillette, actually, one of your favourite publications, Paul.
But it's from a specific writer.
Yeah.
Quillette
is
not, an ideologically uniform publication. They accept essays from a range of people.
This is from Claire Lehman, the editor.
Is it not by the author's name at the bottom?
No, this is from Claire Lehman, editor of Quillette.
Oh, this particular quotation. Yeah. But the whole article is written by Parnell.
Yeah, but she's quoting Claire Lehman, who's the editor of Quillette.
Indeed she is.
And she says, quoting Claire Lehman as saying, "We haven't yet developed a vocabulary to deal with the disappointments, regrets, heartache, confusion and frustration that comes with sexual freedom. The irony is that in focusing so much on consent, we've forgotten about the emotional and moral valence of sex, so it's not surprising that many young people have no vocabulary to deal with its many complexities other than a black and white legal concept. Thanks to the birth control pill, women and men can be free of the biological consequences of sex, but sex still has consequences. We are looking for ways to express and basically having returning back to this author who says As a new generation of women makes itself heard, middle-class boomers should not once again make the moment about them. So there was an article that got sort of shared a fair bit from the Sydney Morning Herald about boomer feminism.
Why are you shaking your head, Shae?
Loaded-
I don't know. I
loaded-
found that-
loaded
I found
nonsense?
that article so triggering, so jarring,
Really? Why?
such bullshit.
Mm.
Because it's just like
Blaming-
acknowledging progress on the one hand and halting it on the other.
Mm.
That's how it reads to me.
Really?
Yeah,
I think it's
So,
a lot more
sh-
nuanced than that.
yeah. What do you think?
I think she makes some interesting points. And look, I've thought about this quite a lot in recent years, and I grew up in this period. You know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I was one of the beneficiaries of the sexual revolution, because when I was a young person, you know, people were sleeping with each other very, very freely, and it was prior to the emergence of the AIDS epidemic, and you know, it was very free and easy. And on reflection, you know, at the time I thought this was great. Everybody's free to enjoy themselves, you know, and without the hang-ups of our parents' generation. But I don't know, I've changed my view a little bit over the years, and I think that sex is not just another source of fun, you know. I mean, it's a very uniquely special activity that people do to procreate. Now, I'm not saying it should or is only about procreation, but I think, you know, there's something about having sex with someone that makes the relationship different. And I think some people just treat it as just another activity, like, you know, playing a game of tennis with someone or something like that. You know what I mean? And I think there is an element of uniqueness about having sex with someone.
Sex is being devalued because it's too
too
available.
easy,
Is that
too
what you're
available.
saying?
But not only that, I think there are a lot
Doesn't
of...
come with the risks and responsibility that it used to come with, and therefore it
Well-
lost something.
Well, there's that, but I think it has a very deep emotional component that a lot of people don't fully consider before they enter into a sexual relationship.
But does it for everyone? Like,
I'm not saying for everyone, but, you know, and I'd like to hear Shae's opinion on this, because, you know, people do say that women and men do have somewhat different, and this is a generalization, it's not true for everyone, but have slightly different motivations for having sex with somebody. And, you know, there's the old, it's, you know, it's a joke, but I heard somebody repeat it today, you know, and they said, women need a reason to have sex, men just need a place.
Right.
You know, it's this idea that men are just by nature more promiscuous than women. You know, men are much more likely to have sex with a perfect stranger that they've just met than a woman is.
Right.
Is that not, you know, a reasonable assumption? And I'm not saying, I'm not asking,
Okay.
I'm not asking for you personally,
I don't know.
but, you know,
I only have anecdotal data on that. I don't.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's true for everybody, but you know what I mean. And somebody, can I mention one more thing? And because this also piqued my curiosity, and I just don't know the answer, but it was suggested that, and maybe anyone who's gay and who's listening can give us some feedback. Is it true, and this is a wild assumption, that gay men are generally more promiscuous than gay women, for example?
Robin or Scott, if you're in the chat room, let us know. But
Because
I think
that would indicate, if gay men are more promiscuous than gay women, then
Well, it could mean
would-
that there's just less social consequence for that.
But what I'm getting at is, if gay men are more promiscuous than gay women, then it follows perhaps that heterosexual men are also just, you know, that men in general, whether they're heterosexual or homosexual or whatever, men are just more promiscuous than women.
But none of
But-
that can really be blamed on boomer feminism, can it?
No, I think what it's
no.
much like porn, the availability of porn now, and people are blaming it for all sorts of things. And the problem is, we're not teaching our children that this is fantasy, that this isn't
Yeah.
real life. We're not having the conversations. The same, we've blown away the historical role models of gender and sex. The getting married, only having your spouse, or for men having affairs with other women, but these traditional models, we've blown them away, but we're not having the conversations about how do we replace that.
Yeah.
And that we're lacking the conversations, we're lacking the skills to be able to negotiate, to be able to understand the complexities of human interactions now that we've blown away the rigid social structures that used to be there.
Yeah.
So part of the theory would be that men sowing their seeds are sort of the long-term consequences aren't so great for them, whereas for women, they would be looking for a partner who's going to hang around and help them raise the child. Like in terms of hardwired evolutionary sort of processes going on in the mind.
Not in
From
the
a-
mind. I think it's probably an unconscious drive.
Well, hardwired evolutionary sort of thought processes that are within us. So if the basis is that people want their DNA to continue and to be spread throughout the world, then from a man's point of view, the more he gets around, then the more chance he has of his DNA being distributed. Whereas for a woman, she needs, from the biological sort of village sort of situation, someone to hang around who's going to help her raise a child.
The
So
best strategy for a woman is actually to settle down with a reliable man, but to have an affair when she's ovulating
right.
with the best hunter-gatherer, the best hunter in the tribe.
Indeed,
Yeah.
yes. So when you talked about promiscuity, though, and men are more promiscuous...
Before you go on, can I
Yep.
just mention one thing? Because you said, if a man wants, I don't think it's a conscious thing. I think it's purely instinctive. I think men do it without thinking about it at all, necessarily. And women too, we are, instinctive creatures when it comes to reproduction. We are hardwired to reproduce, regardless of what we're
I
thinking.
agree. You hear a lot of stories and you go, man, you weren't thinking, or if you were thinking, you were thinking with your dick. Like, that's sort of a statement that comes out, isn't it? Like,
There's actually, listening to Justin Leigh Miller, who's a sex researcher, talking about, he was interviewing someone who's done research on condom use. And the more turned on men are, the less likely they are to use condoms.
right,
The same is true for women, but to a lesser extent.
right.
So they are more likely to want to use condoms, but they're still subject to the same sexual... Basically, when people are excited, horny, they're less likely to make rational decisions.
That makes sense.
It does make sense.
But if we're talking about, there's more promiscuous men than women, but doesn't a promiscuous man need a promiscuous woman? Like,
Not necessarily.
so who is he being promiscuous with?
Whoever's available and who agrees to have sex with him.
We're talking about heterosexual relationships. Like, just wouldn't it make sense that if you've got a bunch of promiscuous men, then if they're going to be promiscuous, they need a female partner to be promiscuous with? Wouldn't it more or less?
But they don't have to be in the same numbers.
Unless you've got... Okay, so
Of
you
the
could
oldest
have...
profession in the world.
Okay, so you could have a large
There's
number
also
of...
Tinder.
A large number of men being promiscuous once a week and a small number of women being promiscuous every night of the week, sort of thing. Is that what we're saying?
Could be.
For the numbers to even up. Because just trying to think of how that works in terms of numbers. Who knows?
Well, they don't have to be even numbers anyway, as we know.
Anyway, there was a competing response to that article from Tory Shepherd in Crikey, who just said, in relation to that earlier article, bullshit, and basically she said that one of the lovely things about today, thanks to feminism and medical science, sex doesn't have to have consequences. Sex can just be a frolic. Thanks to the birth control pill and other devices, women can control their own fertility and can enjoy sex that is consciously uncoupled from procreation. Sure, talking about consent can be complicated, but is it really more complicated than the centuries of tradition when no one talked about consent at all? So she's saying that.
But somebody also made the point that it's generally speaking women, and perhaps men, but women are obviously the ones who get pregnant, women of the poorer classes in society who generally, or are more likely to become, single mothers. And single mothers, being a single mother and being poor at the same time is obviously not a good thing for anybody. But, the so-called sexual liberation is more of a benefit of middle-class people than poorer people, in a sense. Even though contraception is obviously available to everybody, it's probably safe to say that middle-class, better-educated women and people in generally are more, what would you say, savvy about, having that available all the time.
Don't know. But I have heard that people in their 20s at the moment are having less sex than 20-year-olds of 20 years ago.
Really? In Australia too?
Yes.
That's
Somebody can Google that and tell us whether that's the case or not, but I've just heard that young people are having less sex today.
It's been the
than
case
they were
in Japan
previously.
for some time,
Yes.
according to reports.
Right.
Apparently, they're also drinking less.
Yes.
So
Heard that as
maybe
well.
there's a link.
Yes, maybe.
Be interesting to find whether drug use has replaced that.
You don't has replaced
Legalisation of
sex.
marijuana. No,
Oh.
drinking.
Oh, right. Yes.
Ah.
Possibly.
Mm.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Came across a petition. I don't know how I stumbled across this, which was recent movement into and out of the government cabinet seems to show a big increase in members of parliament who proclaim they are Pentecostal Christians. It may be of benefit to the average person to find out who the Pentecostal Christians are so they can frame their queries to the right person. We therefore ask the House to create a list of Pentecostal Christian members of parliament. It's a petition that's in place at the moment. Just a reminder, on the Iron Fist Velvet Glove website, there is the index which gives a list of my understanding of the religious affiliation of different politicians and a score as to their secular
Surely
tendencies.
that would be religious discrimination to purely pick on the Pentecostal Christians.
Certainly
Yeah,
looks
that would
like
be.
So
list
but-
them all.
Well, I was going to say list how religious people are and how much they believe that religion has a place in government.
Well, what they should be doing is they should be declaring it in their conflict of interest register. So guys like Christian Porter and whatnot will list their membership of a poultry association or all sorts of obscure groups that they are members of because it's potentially a conflict of interest if they make a decision. And these people are about to pass laws potentially on a religious discrimination bill without declaring a clear conflict of interest if they are religious. So it's more a case of that register.
Well,
Should declare it for the reasons of a conflict of interest.
There was also there was the High Court case with the Catholic, with the citizenship. They were there was a court case because they were a Catholic that they had allegiance to both the Catholic Church and
allegiance
also
to the
Australia.
Vatican.
Yes.
Or something was that? Yes, that was the argument.
Yes.
Was because the Pope is the head of the Vatican,
Which is
it
another
was
country.
Allegiance to another country.
Yes.
Yeah, that fell over pretty quick. That argument.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but for conflict of interest in terms of passing laws about religion,
Yeah.
you should know what religion you are if you're going to grant favours and special privileges. So
And we know that Morrison did arrange a grant to the church he attends, didn't he, in Sydney?
So the best thing you can do at the moment is go into the Iron Fist Velvet Glove website and look at the secular index to see what's there.
Fill in the blanks.
Right. Just a quick one on News Corp because I like to pick on them every so often. And Kevin Rudd spoke at the National Press Club, and the Australian, owned by Murdoch, sent a reporter there, and not a single Murdoch paper reported anything about Kevin Rudd at the National Press Club, where basically every other media organisation did. So they just all got the picture not to report on Kevin Rudd, They all are of one mind somehow. And the other example of Murdoch media acting of one mind was in relation to George Bush's invasion of Iraq. 175 Murdoch papers worldwide, all but one, the Hobart Mercury, supported the war, but the Mercury was soon brought into line. So the editors and opinion writers all happened to have the same opinion about that.
But it wasn't just
war.
Murdoch's papers that were supporting it, was it?
No, but it was Murdoch's 175 papers were all unanimous about it, and you might struggle to find other papers that were so unanimous in such a broad diversity of outlets. 175.
You might not, unless you
Find-
actually survey all the other
Find one who
newspaper
wasn't.
companies. I don't know.
So
I wouldn't know where to start.
it's just curious that that they could all be so unanimous, even though they're so independently minded. Right, we've done the Japanese sexist comment. Oh, here's one. So, the Burqa ban. It's been a long time since we've spoken about the Burqa. Swiss voters have narrowly approved a proposal to ban face coverings, both the niqabs and the burqas, worn by a few Muslim women in the country, and the ski masks and bandanas used by protesters. So Swiss have voted about that. And the picture of the lady talking about this, she's wearing a mask, a COVID mask, obviously. It's a little bit odd when you've got a woman wearing a mask talking about passing a law stopping other people wearing masks. I know my view on burqas and things changed a bit after my visit to Japan a couple of years ago, where I saw so many people wearing masks. This is pre-COVID.
Yeah, but they were surgical masks. Not,
Yes.
Not burqas.
In-
They
in-
weren't
indeed.
covering their whole bodies. They weren't covering their hair.
One of my big arguments for being against the burqa and the niqab was that I felt I need to be able to assess other people around me as to whether they're a threat or not, and as to their intentions. And when people have a face covering, you can't do that. And yet when people have a surgical mask because they don't want to pass the flu on to somebody, the same thing happens. You can't tell what's really going on in their face. And I thought after that I was less vehement about my opposition to the burqa and the niqab after that. And has anybody else changed their mind or lessened their hostility to religious burqas and niqabs?
I think that this is a short-term band-aid whilst we have a pandemic. And realistically, you shouldn't be out and about if you're contagious. Now, whilst the majority of the population, or large numbers of the population, are contagious in the case of a pandemic, most of the time they're not. And realistically, if you are sick, you shouldn't be out and about in public, or as little as possible. And therefore, usually you wouldn't see people out with a mask on.
Yes, but in Japan I saw lots.
But is that just because they were sick, or was that for other reasons?
It's because they've either got a cold or they're afraid of getting one. But it's usually in Japan, I believe, it's usually people who have a cold or some kind of sickness and they don't want to share it with their colleagues.
Or they don't want to put makeup on. So we had a guide in Tokyo, and she said, sometimes when I'm just going to drop the kids off at the school and whatever, I don't want to put makeup on. I just put a mask on and go. It was just an easy way of doing it.
I lived
Great
in
idea.
Japan for, as you know, a number of years. I never heard a Japanese person say anything like that.
There you go.
It was always related to health.
Yeah. So that was...
So I'd say that was an idiosyncratic opinion rather than a general opinion.
Anyway, sort of made sense. But anyway, I'm a bit less vehement about the mask for burqa and the niqab after all of this. Like, there was a thing today where a woman in America was arrested in a bank, not because she was wearing a mask, but because she refused to wear a mask in a bank. That's what the world's come to.
So
Interesting.
Just before you go on, though, where does it say there in the article that it's about empowering women? Or is that a different one we read? No, it's not there.
Why would it be about empowering women? Oh, you mean empowering Muslim women?
Just down the bottom here, it says, supporters of the proposal, this is the vote to ban the face masks, argued the full face coverings
Symbolise
the repression of women, and said the measure was needed to uphold a basic principle that faces should be shown in a free society like Switzerland's. Well, that second part is sort of irrelevant because of COVID, and the measure was needed to uphold a basic principle that faces should be shown. Well, we're breaching that basic principle all the time now. Even the woman announcing it is breaching it.
But as Joe said, the surgical masks are not expected to be a permanent feature.
Yes.
They're not, but you know what? They might become more regular.
They might.
But I just wanted to know what Paul thought about that.
About what?
Well, you sometimes have this theme in your conversations around, like, really, people think they can legislate freedom, or we keep putting in these laws around liberties and freedoms. Like, you know, isn't this coming a little close to that? Where we are legislating we're legislating freeing women by not allowing them to wear the face covering of their choosing.
Are you assuming I'm supporting this legislation?
Well, I just wanted to check which way
just
you were
asking
going.
which way. Yeah, do you support the banning of the burqa and the niqab?
No, not necessarily. I think in certain contexts, like at an airport, possibly in a bank, obviously in a law court, I think people should be obliged to show their faces, yes.
Okay, but in the normal streets and around town and in shops?
I'm not comfortable with people walking around in burqas. I absolutely find it bizarre and a little bit disconcerting. But to legislate it, I think that might be a step too far. I'm not really in favour of governments telling people what they can or can't wear, except in certain situations where security requires it. I mean, I personally find it strange to talk to people, and I have in my line of work actually worked with some Muslim women who did not reveal their faces to me, and I found it very. I mean, I did it because that was my job to talk to these women. It wasn't my place to tell them what they should or shouldn't, be wearing, and obviously I didn't, treat them any differently to other people. But I did find it difficult to hear what they were saying sometimes, and it's a little bit disconcerting to try and communicate with somebody, and they got this thing across their face, which can make it difficult to hear what they're saying.
But on the whole, you wouldn't stop them. You wouldn't pass a law.
I think legislating it is perhaps a step too far because, as I said, I'm not really in favour of governments being able to tell us what we can or cannot wear.
How about the French model where if you are on government property, so in any of the bureaucracy,
Post office? Or,
so government workers serving the public, you mean?
Government workers serving the public in
should
school,
not display
in the courts,
religious.
Government workers rather than visitors.
I think, not sure, but I think it's both.
Right.
But it's no overt religious symbols to be displayed.
I can sort of understand that, in a sense that the government is supposed to be secular, supposed to be neutral.
But that's the government imposing an authoritarian rule on the freedom
of the staff.
But French laïcité has long been like that.
Yeah, it is, but Paul's long been libertarian. So
well, that's true.
This is the conundrum where it's a conflict of Paul's tendency to not pass laws that interfere with personal freedom.
Yes.
In the chat room, Landon Hardbottom says, the surgical mask is their choice. Can we say the same for the other? Well, we have no idea, Landon. That's the problem, is have these people been coerced? Have they been freely choosing it? Have they been so brainwashed by a system that in fact, while they might say they are freely adopting it, they've actually been brainwashed in the same way that a cult member has been brainwashed.
And not only brainwashing,
we don't
Trevor,
know.
It's peer pressure is a very strong force.
Yes.
But also, if you think that a god is going to smite you dead,
Yeah.
or torture you in hell because of it, is that a true choice?
I remember when we talked about this years ago, one of the interesting theories was that older women in those societies were keen to keep the practice because it disempowered young, attractive women because they were hidden behind these garments and it put them more on an equal footing with the older ladies.
Yeah.
Well, I and her CLE said the genital mutilation was carried out by the older women.
Yes.
Yes.
And in fact, they were the ones who seemingly kept the practice going.
Absolutely, yes.
Rather than the
'Cause
men.
her father didn't want it done, and when her father was out of town, it was her grandmother who
That's
arranged
right,
it.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Right, that was masks. Milo Yiannopoulos, famous gay activist.
Born again virgin.
He's found Jesus. So,
Do you believe that? I mean, when I saw this article, I thought, really? He's having us all on, isn't he?
so he was the guy who made comments about Islam and consequently was banned from entering Australia. Quite a provocative guy, and he's found God. And so he says that secular attempts at recovery from sin are either temporary or completely ineffective. Said Yiannopoulos, who married his boyfriend but now claims to have demoted him to housemate.
More like housemaid.
I think he's having us all on, frankly. I don't believe it for a moment.
It's been suggested that he's merely doing this to be relevant.
Okay.
I
who knows?
just don't believe it.
When he was being provocative and in the news the last time, I remember having an argument in a pub with a pilot over him. And the pilot kept insisting that Milo Yiannopoulos cannot be racist because he's in a relationship with a gay black man. That's all there is to it.
Right.
So,
Right.
yes,
Were
I
you-
think Milo Yiannopoulos might be having us on again.
Were you arguing that he is a racist?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
On what basis?
Other
The argument
statements that he
was
made.
years ago, so I can't get you the data.
That's all right.
Well, if you said all black people should be at the back of the bus, they should sit at a different
Did
counter.
he say that?
No, but I'm just saying, if somebody said things like that, but meanwhile had a black boyfriend, you could still say they're racist.
However, the reason he
So-
got banned was he said that he'd had a sexual relationship as a teenager with an older man, and he didn't see that was harmful.
Yes,
That's
right.
why he was banned from here.
That's right.
No, that was why he lost his publishing deal and
Yes.
kicked off
He
various
got
things.
cancelled.
Yeah, he got cancelled.
He was an early,
Yes.
early
For that?
casualty. of-
Yes.
With all the other things that I
No,
seem to
that was the thing he got cancelled for.
What was the age difference?
Oh, I think he was 14 and the adult was in their 30s.
And was he recommending it?
I think he was saying that he didn't
What's
see
the
that it,
pretext to the context?
he wasn't. He didn't see it as inherently harmful, I think was what he was saying.
Right. But he wasn't promoting it.
Not as-
Actively
I
promoting
don't think he was saying that everyone should go out and do it. No.
Right, we've come up to an hour and a half, and Landon Hardbottom has got his stopwatch out. Landon, are you in the chat room? And have we avoided the Shark Tank? And
Have you had your value for money yet?
Yes, because I'm going to call an end to it. Next week, I would like to talk about some topics that have been sitting here for a while. Really, how the religious right has taken this whole freedom and cancel culture narrative and adopted it for their own purposes, and the use of the term cultural Marxism I'd like to talk about. And we're going to talk about Sweden and lockdown and South Dakota and...
Message from Landon, TikTok.
Yeah, right. And, yeah, a few things there that have been sitting for a while that we haven't got to. So that can all be for next week. So hope you enjoyed the show, dear listener. Oh, I forgot again about the patrons. I've only had one new patron lately, and that was Liam. Good on you, Liam. Thanks for being a patron. Haven't had a new one for a while on Liam, so consider signing up if you haven't already. I will definitely get through the list next week. And
give it to me. I'll figure out a way of doing scrolling credits.
Right. Yeah. Okay. But then if somebody's listening rather than watching.
Oh, that's true.
Okay. Anyway, bye from me for now. Talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
And it's a